There are basically three major blows to mankind. One was Copernicus, the second one was Darwin, and the third one was Freud. Copernicus was one of the first people to show that we really weren't the center of the universe. Darwin, of course, showed us we come from slime. And Freud, knocked on our door and said, we really don't know what we're doing. To be a psychologically astute leader means that you have to deconstruct the notion of leadership.
You never know what is going on in somebody's mind, somebody's experience outside of work.
People work better when they're seen.
Right.
People work better when they're recognized.
Hello and welcome to BetterTech. I'm your host, Colin McCarthy, here to explore the dynamic world of tech with you. Today, we're not going to be talking to a CEO, CTO, or CIO like we often do. Today, we're talking to a psychologist and psychoanalyst to help us understand human behavior in leadership. As we know, all great tech companies have great leaders, and they learn and receive guidance from professionals like our guest today, Nicholas Samstag. Nicholas, please introduce yourself and share a little bit about what drew you into psychology and psychoanalysis.
Well, thanks so much, Colin. It's really a pleasure to be here. As we were, talking about before you hit the record button, I was surprised and delighted that your team reached out to me. Right. So to answer your question as succinctly as possible, I discovered psychology. I discovered psychotherapy because I was sort of thrashing around in my own life, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was working for Time magazine at the time, and my girlfriend then was one of the few people I knew who was going into psychotherapy. She was in psychotherapy. I'm sorry, my throat is just not cooperating. She was in psychotherapy and she didn't proselytize it, but I noticed that, she was a pretty crazy girl. I was pretty crazy too. And she was getting better. Sorry. And I thought, you know what? I'm sensing certain patterns in my life. I had too much education at that point even. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And in the publishing world, I would say no to mentors who wanted to mentor me. I would be unconsciously, sort of anachronistic and tilting against authority. And I thought, what's going on here? So I got into psychotherapy with a very, not an analyst, but a very smart psychologist, clinical psychologist. And my mind was blown. My mind was blown about very simple things like, I started missing every third session. And I would say, well, it's because I had a meeting or I had this thing, that thing. He said, well, maybe, but maybe you don't want to talk about the death of your father. And I thought, holy shit, you're right. I don't want to talk about that at all. Real simple stuff like basic ideas of displacement and projection. Anyway, so I started doing that. And then I'm going to condense this because I've had a labyrinthine journey here. My mother died and I went back to school and started, I thought at a certain point, I'm not going to be a businessman. It was a bad fit on so many levels. And I thought, you know what, the psychotherapy thing is kind of cool and I could probably do this. So I went back to school. I got another degree or two and then got into a Ph.D. program and went through that. And somewhere along the line, I remembered that when I was my first BA, I say this with embarrassment because it took me so long to get my head together. I encountered Freud through Stanislavski, who was a Russian dramaturg, and Stanislavski revolutionized American theater, and it based very, very much on Freudian concepts, basic Freudian concepts. So I remembered that. And I thought, you know what? I can do this. So I applied to a few PhD programs, got in one, got out of there. And then during the course of that, I thought, you know what? I don't really want to be a psychologist. A psychologist is fine. But what I really want to do is be a psychoanalyst. Why? Because it would afford me the experience of helping people at the deepest levels.
Right.
And that's what I wanted to do. So that's... That's it.
Through that journey, how has that sort of shaped your understanding of human behavior in leadership? Obviously, you talked about wanting to help people. Even great leaders need to have guidance and support and training. How did that help your understanding of human behavior, the path that you took?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that uh, i- in a circuitous way. So I forget who initially said this, but there are basically three major blows to mankind. One was Copernicus, second one was Darwin, and the third one was Freud. So Copernicus was one of the first people to show that we really weren't the center of the universe. Um, Darwin, of course, showed us that we come from the sea, we come from slime, and Freud, knocked on our door and said we really don't know what we're doing. So I think it was the we really don't know what we're doing thing that got me. And in looking over these really great questions, I think one thought to consider is that leadership and such terms often tend to be looked at in a kind of vacuum. And we can slice up the human experience in terms of discrete little cells. And I think there's something to that. But I think it's also important to understand, what's the largest picture here? Like, what's the umbrella
Hmm.
term? And I think the umbrella here for me is psychology. Like, psychology is going to be with humans as long as biology is with humans. There's no getting around it. And it's a big term and it means different things. There are different aspects of it. But I think, when we talk about leadership,
Hmm.
um, we're, we're manifestly talking about control and power. But it's much more than that, obviously. Every leader inherits in his or her company all the problems of every family that walks in the door.
Yeah, yeah.
And 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 they have to be, I think, to be, and it sounds like an oxymoron to me, frankly, no offense to anyone, but to be a psychologically astute leader means that you have to deconstruct the notion of leadership. And you have to ask yourself, like, what's the biggest picture here? The biggest picture is psychology. And you don't have to go get degrees in it, and you don't have to even be in it, although I would suggest that everyone is in it. What kind of psychotherapy is a whole other question. But I think leaders are surrogate parents. They're surrogate brothers and sisters and parents, and they have an enormous amount of power, the majority of which is unrecognized. And I also think, this is skipping ahead, I guess, a little bit, but I think, in the business world, the main focus is economic,
Yeah.
and I have no trouble with that. But if you want to make the most money and be the most successful, as designated by that monetary term, then one of the most practical things you can do is be psychologically astute, and that's a big chew. I mean, that means people have to look at themselves, and they have to examine their persona and their bullshit tolerance
Yeah,
level.
yeah.
Sorry, can I say that here?
That's fine. It's
Um,
the sort of the honesty and the authenticity in what you're saying. Um, can we dive a little bit deeper into some of this? So, you talk about businesses and leaders being surrogate, brothers, sisters, parents, uncles, aunts, and they often talk about how a business is, or companies are a family, but a lot of people push back on that because it's not, and obviously that family term can often be used in a very negative way in business. But I like the analogy that you are walking in, you are dealing with every personal aspect that employee has, and I'm often aware of that. You never know what is going on in somebody's mind, somebody's experience outside of work, and their influences that can impact their productivity and their decision making. So with leaderships, what sort of personal narratives do influence the decisions that leaderships and executives leadership style? And how do they, how do those personal narratives influence how they run their business?
Hugely. I think I'm very interested in narrative and literature and the narrative arcs and all of that. I think it'd be fair to say that most leaders have no idea what we're talking about. So, from the standpoint of have they ever thought about their narrative? I mean, a narrative, just to be clear, is a linear logical construct that's based in a kind of longitudinal interest, right? So it's a story. It's a beginning, a middle, and where we are now. For people to do that in any kind of serious way takes an enormous amount of time. So I would say, first of all, that the folks running the shows have never thought about it. And if they have thought about it, they've typically been told to put it together in some superficial way. So one of the main things standing in the way of mental health, variously described, and certainly successful businesses, is you have to be able to look at yourself. You have to be able to look at yourself, which is very disarming and very hard to do. And not everybody wants to do it, and not everybody can do it. One of the things that one of the many things that I've enjoyed, I have a podcast. I haven't done much with it recently, but I've interviewed a lot of people at this point. And one of the things that is apparent to me is that there are a lot of businesses who are actually, this is my language, not theirs, interested in deconstructing the business persona, so that you're not living a role anymore as a leader. You're actually a person with foibles.
Right.
And I don't mean anything crunchy granola about that. It's very practical. Like, you come on board and you may make more money than everybody, and you may be whatever you are. But when you're in that situation, you're in an intensely vulnerable psychological atmosphere, which, if recognized, could reasonably result in an enormous profit and success in that way. But people work better when they're seen.
Right.
People work better when they're
Yeah,
recognized.
it's interesting you talk about the roles that leaders have to take on. There's a term in business that I've heard, certainly from some of the great people officers, talent officers, staff members in HR, the traditional HR that's now more people and talent focused, about people masking. If you have a belief or a style, but it might not be right for the business that you're in, people end up masking, and they end up sort of performing that role. And obviously I think that can be very, very difficult for executives, and I think a lot of them do struggle with that. And it is, for an executive to be 100% perfect all the time and never make an error, it must be an incredible challenge for them. I've in all the businesses I've been in, sometimes an executive can say the wrong thing, have a bad day, and everybody instantly, potentially loses respect for them. And then it's very, very difficult for them to rebuild that trust with a business. But having a bad day is inherently human. So how can they sort of recognize and overcome some of that?
Well, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think the whole binary splitting here between error and not. I mean, that's one of the things that has to be deconstructed. Like, what's an error? I think I was going to say we live in a culture. It's always been the case where, to be, what does it mean to be authentic? I mean, there's so many great examples of this. We could talk about the scene in Hamlet where he has the players come in and put on the play, right? That somehow it's an artifice that we're going to see what genuineness really means. I mean, I think if I was gonna, it's very similar to a family. How do you run a family? How do you run a business? Well, I think there are many ways of going about that, but one thing is you have to be clear about what the purpose is, right? What's the purpose? And you go from there. And along with purpose, you ask questions like, what are the boundaries? Like, what are people actually expected to do? And how do we help them do that? But as we go along there, what we're implying is a kind of psychological fluency. Like, how comfortable are you with yourself? That's a question that people can understand,
Right.
right? If you're not comfortable with yourself, you're going to make less money. I mean, you may make a lot of money for a while, but you're not, if the goal here, and I'm saying
Yeah.
this, tongue in cheek, but, of course, let's make as much money as possible. Fine. And I hope that that's not the only goal. But to the extent that it's any goal, one of the best ways of doing that is to be psychologically
Mhm.
fluent and to not feel like the world's collapsing when you call somebody the wrong name, or you do this thing or that thing. There are much more interesting things to talk about than that.
Right. Yeah.
You have soup on your shirt. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
So, so, so the term narcissistic injury is all about that. It's like narcissistic injury occurs when we are so fragile that we collapse
Right.
at any recognition of imperfection, which, if we were in a decent psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, would not be the case. We would expect it.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, you talk about, the primary goal for all businesses and the business leaders is to be successful, be commercially successful, make money, and hopefully do other good things, as well as just being a profit margin focused business. In your experience, what are there common blind spots that most successful leaders have about themselves? Is there I won't say issue, but is there a theme that impacts a lot of leaders in your experience?
That's a great question. Is there a theme? I think there are many themes. I think of a game I used to play with my daughter when she was very little. I would carry her around the village on my shoulders, and we'd go look at stuff. And I would ask her what she sees. She's looking at a poster. She's looking at a tree, and then we'd come back, and I'd stop at the same places, and I'd say, "What else do you see?" And she was delighted by this, and I was delighted by her being delighted by this. I think the themes, so
Mhm.
called, are blind spots that we necessarily have. And if we simply can ask the question, "What am I not seeing?" That's often very helpful. But there again, that assumes the capacity for a kind of pliable psychological profile where you have to acknowledge that you're never going to see everything. So what else about this employee have I not seen? Not from the standpoint of, good job, bad job, but from the standpoint of humility. I think one of the things that comes from any kind of decent psychological work is humility, and that arrogance and narcissism and all that are all too pervasive everywhere, not just in the business world. It's hard to look at yourself. Human beings are fragile and they're sensitive, and they take offense in weird ways often. And businesses are not campgrounds and kumbaya situations, obviously. But I think even a kind of basic psychological training would help would help leaders a lot, and they'd have a better time. And I think in the process, they'd make more money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very wise and insightful words, and we all need to sit and throughout the day, throughout the week, and I think look at ourselves and look inwards and have an understanding of ourselves as a as a fragile person that has all the good that we can do, and then our weaknesses. I know that there's one thing that I've experienced, and I know a lot of other IT professionals that I've spoken to, is the fear of imposter syndrome, where we feel we're not right for the job, or we're aren't don't have the skills, or doing a bad job.
Mhm.
Is that something that you've come across with talking to leadership and your sort of studies?
Yeah, for sure. And again, leadership is just a subset of everything else, right? The leadership leaders share all of the psychological stuff that everybody else does. So I think um, that's a great question on a number of levels. We've been taught in the West for so long that symptoms, that human beings have symptoms and the symptoms should be eradicated. So if you have an imposter syndrome, which is not the most robust of diagnostic categories, if you have an imposter syndrome, you're having a reaction to something. And I think the first assumption is that that's neurotic. It may well be neurotic, but the paradox about neurosis is that, it's there for a healthy reason. If you're feeling alienated, ask yourself why you're feeling alienated. Are you, you're probably feeling alienated because the behaviors that you see yourself doing and the things you hear yourself saying are not congruent with how you think you are. And that's a really interesting thing to think about. It's like, there you are. And you're running the show and making money and people seem happy and you have an imposter syndrome. Like, why would that be alienating? So the question is, what about all of that seems discordant to you? I mean, not everyone, never say everyone, but so many people, when they get their PhDs, the first time you're in a class or you see a patient or you think, Jesus, man, they actually let me in. Like, who was asleep at the wheel? Like, oh my God. And then, on and on and on, right? Like you open your business or you got on a podcast or you something, or they're like, Jesus, man, these people are really asleep at the wheel. So, I mean, those are opportunities. So I would say, I'm being long-winded. I would say that symptoms need to be respected. I say this to my patients all the time. Your symptoms are brilliant. Your symptoms are brilliant articulations of what's happening with you. Let's not look at them just to get rid of them. Let's understand where they come from.
And Howard is. I'm trying to look for maybe a soundbite that we can snip out and make go viral. How is there a fix for imposter syndrome? You talk about it being a symptom. What is one good thing that an IT professional can do for themselves when they're coming across that feeling?
Call me. I mean, I respect that you want sound bites, and I'm happy to try to produce them. But I think these things will just circle back and come up again. So I don't think you need to be in 20-year psychoanalysis. But I think that I think as part of being a responsible person and getting the most out of life, it behooves us to get into some kind of treatment, especially when we're not bleeding from the neck. I've only, in my many years of practice, only had this happen maybe twice, where someone's come to me without a presenting problem. I mean, there's nothing really wrong here, they would say, but I want to get it. I just want to explore this thing about what I do. It's like, that's ideal.
Right, yeah. It's almost like having a wellness check. It's like having your annual exam. You make sure that you're okay before you have, symptoms.
Right. And there's, in addition to symptoms, and this is a plug for what I do, of course, but in addition to symptoms, it used to be the case many years ago that any educated person would be in psychoanalysis. And okay, there's all kinds of things to say about that. But I think, in Argentina, in Latin America, still to this day, if you're an educated person and you're in certain intellectual circles, you're necessarily in psychoanalysis, not because you have symptoms per se, but because you're interested in, to go back to what you were saying, the narrative arc. Like, where did I come from? What's my psychological history and how is that impacting me today? These are interesting questions without even going near major diagnostic categories.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think hopefully a lot of us listening today and myself will take what you've said and shared and go away and have a quiet moment, sit in the woods or sit in a park somewhere if you're in a big city and think. So we're 20 minutes in, and I'm gonna get to an AI question, because every
Sure.
tech podcast gets to that point where AI gets mentioned in this day and age. So So, AI is increasingly shaping how executives understand teams and organizations. They use AI for a lot of sorry, my words have disappeared early this morning. So they will use AI for a lot of analysis and get insights into facts about their employees. But how do you see psychology complementing AI in leadership and decision making? Obviously AI is very conversational. You can have a conversation with many of those different platforms. But how is that complementing the traditional psychology?
Well, that's a that's a big chew of a question. Um, what I know about AI could be inscribed on the head of a pen. Um, let's see. I've thought about this a bit. I think I think human beings historically and currently are very into saviors. They're very into something beyond themselves, something big, something grandiose. We like that. We like the idea of being saved, and we like the idea of having answers at our disposal. I was thinking of the Oracle at Delphi, which is one of my favorite examples of this, where in ancient Greece there was a priestess who would get hopped up on some drug, we don't exactly know what, and start spouting really interesting stuff. And people flocked to her for years and years and years and felt that what she had to say was going to be revolutionary and was going to change their lives. I think there have been many examples of that since then. I think from what I understand, from my very meager appreciation of AI, it's an amazingly powerful tool for many things. I um I think the where psychology comes in is that AI is not going to change human psychology. Human psychology, like human biology, will change over millennia.
Mhm.
So I think the best use of AI would be, again, to be interested in learning more deeply what it means to be a person. And I can't imagine, however clever AI is, that it's going to be replacing the depth work in psychology. I just can't imagine that, because that's a real oxymoron to me. I think we live in a place where not just IT people, but a lot of other people, really eschew human interaction. And why is that? Why is it easier to talk to a machine? Well, because the likelihood of being humiliated is far less. Uh, I mean, and I'm sure you've heard, and I've heard horror stories about people killing themselves because of AI. And I have a patient whose father fell in love with an AI woman, whatever that means. And those stories are only increasing. So I think AI um, is just the latest, sharp, shiny, interesting thing that we're hoping will save us. And I don't imagine that's going to be true. And on the other hand, I think that there is just such possibility, if not probability, of really bad things happening, because human beings are stumbling around. We're all stumbling around. And the people at the top often don't know what they're doing. So whether it's going to be a combination of, whether it's going to be evil, um, or whether it's going to be incompetence, I'm quite worried that it's like giving sharp objects to small children. I mean, I think it's a real problem. So I would, I'm not that interested in AI taking over our jobs, although I think there will be. I used AI recently to write a letter to some lawyer about some stupid labor issue I had. The labor department thought I was a corp. I mean, I am a corporation, but they thought I was a big
Right.
corporation, and I couldn't just. And it went away. But I asked AI to do it, and it took AI about 3 seconds, and it was amazing, and it worked. So I think that's great. So I think a short answer to your question is, I think if the people who are running AI things could somehow get interested in human psychology, I think it would be far, far better for us. And if they don't, I think we're in for trouble.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, there has been a lot of unfortunately the sad stories of how humans have interacted and with AI, falling in love, taking their own lives. And I do think this is another technological invention that we're, an industrial revolution that we're going through. I'm sure people objected to the printing press when that first was created. People were against radio. People were very much against television, and it was going to rot children's minds. People were against video games. It was going to, destroy society. Obviously, we do know and aware that social media has had, and the internet has had an impact on people. Potentially, there's a whole separate discussion of whether that is solely bad, or there are the good elements of the internet and social media. This is obviously another progression of that. Is there any sort of, I guess, help or suggestion that you can give for leaders and IT practitioners about how they should think about that intersection with human insight and an AI machine intelligence?
You don't ask easy questions. I think we just need to remember who we are. We need to remember who we are, what the various goals are here. Like as opposed to being in love with the Oracle of Delphi, as opposed to just sort of, because as a group, human beings are extremely lazy and neurotic. Sorry, I love people, but we are like, we're not, I mean, this is, I was thinking about the Hume Hobbes discussions of many years ago. Are we innately beasts, or are we innately something else? And I think, that conversation will outlast all of us. But I think, again, how about some humility and psychological mindedness, as opposed to, this sort of idol worship that we have. I mean, I have some patients who are just completely in love with it. I mean, I don't mean that way, although some of them probably are too. But it's the newest thing. It's the newest, hottest thing, and that just needs to be tempered with, for example, so many of my patients talk about not being able to read as much as they used to. Right. And just with the screen adherence, I think people have been talking about this for a long time now, but that's a real problem. It's a problem for me. I mean, I love to read. Before I know it, I've spent an hour or two doing these interesting, to a certain degree, crossword puzzles and things. I was just like, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? Like, a little bit of that is fine. So there is that dopamine rush, right? And AI, I think, is probably the most robust purveyor of dopamine rushes right now, because people can't get enough of it. And I think part of the reason why is that it's easier than dealing with a person. It's a completely different phenomenon.
Yeah. We have, our human interactions have been replaced with that interaction with that little 6-inch piece of plastic that we worship and we hold around, and we care for, and people spend ridiculous amounts of money to look at and scroll through all the time. And it is that terrible dopamine that we've become addicted to. And I know that the way that humans do absorb information has changed. But this isn't really new, because going through school in the 80s, there was a lot of talk about watching videos and listening to stuff as opposed to reading textbooks. And I think, education became a lot more multimodal with, we weren't just sitting there, reading a boring textbook. We would engage in education in a different way. And I think as leaders, the way that we communicate to our users, certainly about change. That's something that I very much do as a director of digital transformation. we help businesses change. And I help businesses adopt AI and transform their business. The technical side is very easy for us. You know, two IT people can get together and they can do any project that needs to be done. When you add in the human element of that change, it becomes very, very complicated, and that's where you have to spend your focus, and that's where you have to use different media. I was talking to a customer a client the other day. They were going to do a change, and it was like, you know, how are you distributing your instructions? Is it just going to be a PDF that somebody wants to read? And it's like, you know, create some animated GIFs of showing the change. You know, create a video, do an audio podcast. We all have the tools to easily put those together, but you know, more senior people in your organization, the sort of the older staff might want to print it out PDF with the instructions of what they want to do, but the younger generation might want you know, a 3-minute video that they can watch, because that's how a lot of people are assuming information. If they want to learn something new, they jump on YouTube and they learn. Um, how do you, what's your insight into that as a sort of a closing thought to give our IT leaders some sources of information and some guidance about how they can navigate and learn from this changing world that we have?
Yeah, I'm going to sound just redundant, I think, but the first thing I would say was pay attention to who you're trying to teach. You know, we're not all created equal in that way, right? Some of us are very amenable to all of this technology, and other people aren't. And so I think I mean, this is going to be a huge generalization, but I think tech experts, not unlike other experts, can make the mistake of assuming that everyone is as adept and interested in all of this as they are. And that's not true, and it's never going to be true. And so I think, I think as a teacher, at that point, you're a teacher, right? You may be other things, but you're a teacher. You have to pay attention to who your students are. And I learned this, I taught for over 30 years, and I learned this the hard way at first. It's like one size, this is what I say this all the time to my patients, but one size does not fit all. And I think in the tech world, there's often a better way of doing things that's concrete. It's better because it's faster, or it's better because it's less expensive, or it's better. But that, it may be better, and it may be that your pupils will understand how to do that at a certain point. But in the meantime, you have to somehow ask yourself, what about all of this can I make more attractive to these people? Because it's often intimidating, especially to older people. It's intimidating, and like I think I just bought my 7th printer, and I bought it because I got a very cheap Canon printer, and I just wanted to throw it out the window. Like, I wasn't interested in learning anything. I, I just had to get rid of this thing before I went psycho. So I think there's a lot of those responses out there. And then, the teachers, in this case, the tech people, will take it personally. I understand why. As a teacher, I took it personally too. But if the goal is learning, then you have to think about who it is you're trying to teach and what would work for them. And and that gets into things like also experience, which I think that the digital age has really had a big and often negative impact on. Like, what's your experience? I don't think, if you say, is it more meaningful to read a book than to watch a video? I mean, that's kind of a meaningless question. How would I answer that? But I think you can ask the person doing it, what's the difference? I mean, I know for me, if I have to sit down and read Faulkner, or I have to read something of literary weight, it's a very different experience than looking at a video or hearing an audiobook. Is it better? I'm not sure that's a reasonable question, but it's certainly different. And I think people feel more grounded and saner when they have experiences that are more substantial
Mm-hmm.
than not. As defined by them, not me.
Right.
If you find it really worthwhile to spend your day looking at screens and doing all that, then have at it. But if not, ask yourself what other kind of experiences you might like in addition to
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Well, it's been great talking to you, Nicholas, and getting some insight into psychology and psychoanalysis. I know I've got a lot to think about and go off and wander into the woods and sit down for a quiet minute, and hopefully a lot of our listeners will too take a moment today to get away from the screens, and really think and have a look. If somebody wants to take the next step and do some more research and discovery and learn about themselves, and certainly learn how they can be a better leader or start to become a great leader, what are some really good resources that you would recommend for them to start that journey?
Other than calling me, I think I read that question, and I have an answer for you, although it's somewhat arbitrary. I would encourage them to read a really great novel. Novelists have had and will have more insight into the human condition than almost anybody. Um, Jonathan Franzen comes to mind. Pick up a copy of The Corrections, or read some literary person whose story is interesting to you, and ask and get into that. I mean, that I don't think that's a substitute for psychoanalysis or any of that business, but I do think that one of the powerful aspects of good literature is that it necessarily forces you into the human domain with all of our foibles and contradictions and nuances. And so I think to expect that, to expect that as you're a leader or a husband or a wife, just to expect the fact that you're gonna encounter in yourself and in other people all kinds of contradictions, nuances, and conflicts that that make us human, and that's not a symptom. That's just warp and woof of who we are.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we'll take that information on board and find a good book to read. I'll look up that book, and naturally, I'm going to see if it's been made into a film, and I can watch the film as opposed to reading the book. And I'm sure many other people will do that too. But yes, thank you, Nicholas. It's been great talking to you. Yes, everybody listening, look at Nicholas's website, reach out, talk to people, and I wish everybody a great day.
Well, thanks so much, Colin, for being here. It was really a lot of fun. Thank you. Thank you.